The evening sky above the city was painted with the kind of colors that seemed almost too vivid to be real. Swirls of orange, pink, and gold stretched across the horizon, their brilliant hues mirrored in the glassy facades of towering buildings below. The Grand Bellevue Hotel loomed ahead like a monument to opulence and grandeur, its towering stone columns gleaming under the fading light. From a distance, the hotel looked almost ethereal, a bastion of wealth and prestige that promised a world of luxury for those fortunate enough to pass through its revolving doors. For Michael and Clara Whitman, the sight of it was nothing short of breathtaking, though their hearts fluttered with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The hotel wasn't just a place to stay. It was a destination, a symbol of all they had worked toward in their quiet lives. The Whitmans were not wealthy, nor were they accustomed to places like this. But this trip was special. Michael adjusted the collar of his slightly wrinkled suit jacket, trying to ignore the self-consciousness that clung to him like a second skin. He was a man of simple tastes, practical in both his work and his attire. His brown hair was neatly combed, though a few strands had begun to loosen from the tight grip of his comb. His eyes, a deep shade of hazel, scanned the entrance nervously, his pulse quickening at the thought of stepping into a world so far removed from the one he knew. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. They deserved this moment. Beside him, Clara gently squeezed his hand, her soft fingers bringing some comfort to his nerves. She was a woman of grace, but even she couldn't quite hide the tremor in her voice when she spoke. "Can you believe we're finally here?" she asked, her eyes wide with both wonder and apprehension. Michael smiled at her, though there was a nervous edge to it. "We worked hard for this, Clara. No one deserves it more than us." Their journey had been a long and arduous one. The dream of visiting a luxury hotel had always seemed like a distant fantasy, a mere whisper in the background of their daily struggles. Years of hard work, extra hours at the factory, Michael's side hustle as a freelance writer, and Clara's job as a teacher had gradually built a small but growing savings account. The couple had scrimped and saved, cutting out unnecessary expenses and foregoing luxuries to reach this milestone. It had taken longer than they expected, but the night had finally arrived. This wasn't just any trip. It was their anniversary, a celebration of their love and perseverance. For once, they were determined to step out of their humble routine and into a world that had always seemed just out of reach. The Grand Bellevue was a symbol of their achievement, a testament to what hard work and determination could bring. As they stood at the base of the hotel's marble staircase, Michael tried to focus on the excitement of the moment, but the pressure of the unfamiliar world around them kept creeping in. There was an unsettling feeling, a gnawing anxiety at the pit of his stomach. Was it possible that they didn't belong here? Clara squeezed his hand again, pulling him back from his spiraling thoughts. "We deserve this, Michael. No one can take that from us." Michael gave her a more confident smile this time, grateful for her unwavering support. Together, they walked up the steps and pushed open the heavy doors of the hotel. Inside, the sheer scale of the space took their breath away. The lobby was vast, a cathedral of luxury that stretched toward the heavens with soaring ceilings, ornate chandeliers hanging like glistening raindrops, and polished marble floors reflecting the light in a dazzling array. The walls were lined with rich tapestries depicting scenes of ancient royalty, and the air smelled faintly of fresh roses and polished wood. Everything about the place exuded wealth, class, and exclusivity. But as they walked further in, a feeling of unease began to settle over Clara. It wasn't just the immensity of the space, nor the air of formality that seemed to permeate every corner. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible way people looked at them, those who passed by in their designer clothes and sharp suits. They were out of place, she realized. No matter how hard they had worked, no matter how much they had sacrificed, they were still just a couple of regular people in a sea of the elite. She tried to push the thought from her mind. It was their moment. They were here. Nothing else mattered. The front desk was an elaborate structure of dark wood and gleaming brass, manned by a tall, impeccably dressed man who barely glanced up as they approached. Henry Wallace, the hotel manager, was a man who took his job very seriously. He was the epitome of control, a figure who commanded respect with a mere glance. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his mustache was always perfectly shaped. But it was his eyes, cold, calculating, and slightly aloof, that gave him away. Henry didn't just manage the hotel. He governed it, ensuring that it remained an exclusive sanctuary for the privileged. Michael cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Good evening," he said, his words coming out with more confidence than he felt. "We have a reservation, Michael and Clara Whitman." Henry's eyes flickered over them, his gaze barely lingering before he returned to his computer screen. The fingers of his right hand tapped methodically on the keyboard, as if the Whitmans were nothing more than an interruption to his carefully orchestrated routine. A moment passed before he looked up, offering a tight smile that barely reached his eyes. "Whitman, you say?" he repeated, as if the name itself carried some sort of weight. "Yes, I see your reservation. However," he paused for a moment, his expression turning slightly cooler. "It seems there has been an issue. Your booking has been canceled." The words hung in the air, their sharpness cutting through Clara's chest like a blade. "Canceled?" she repeated, her voice trembling with disbelief. "There must be some mistake." Henry's expression remained unchanged. "No mistake, madam. Our system shows your reservation has been canceled due to an oversight."
Michael felt a flicker of anger rise within him, but he kept his voice steady. "We've paid for this night. We've waited for this moment for years." Henry's gaze briefly shifted to the small notebook Michael held, the one containing their booking confirmation. It was a humble thing, the edges worn from months of use, but it was their ticket to this experience. The manager's eyes narrowed just slightly, and he let out a thin, almost imperceptible sigh. "I'm afraid that this hotel has a very specific policy when it comes to our guests. We maintain a level of exclusivity that you simply do not meet." The insinuation was clear, the words laced with disdain. Clara's face flushed with embarrassment, but she refused to back down. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice quivering but firm. Henry didn't even glance up. "Perhaps another establishment in the city would be more suited to your needs. I'm afraid we simply cannot accommodate you." The finality of his words hit them both like a physical blow. Clara's heart sank as she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to surface. Michael clenched his jaw, the bitterness of the moment bubbling up within him. They had worked so hard for this, only to be turned away by a man who didn't even see them as worthy of his time. "This isn't over," Michael muttered under his breath. But before he could say another word, he turned on his heel, taking Clara's hand with a mix of fury and determination. They left the lobby without another glance at the cold, indifferent figure behind the desk. As they walked out, the doors closing behind them with a soft thud, the sound of the hotel's grandeur seemed to echo louder than ever. The world inside had been a dream that now felt tainted by a single, humiliating moment. But Michael knew this wasn't the end. Things had a way of coming full circle. The harsh metallic sound of the hotel doors closing behind them still rang in Michael's ears. Outside, the world felt eerily still, like a strange contrast to the chaos unfolding inside his mind. Clara walked beside him in silence, her face a mask of controlled emotion. She could feel her husband's anger simmering just beneath the surface, and though she too was deeply hurt by what had just happened, she couldn't bring herself to speak first. Their footsteps echoed down the quiet city streets as the lights from the Grand Bellevue dimmed in the distance, swallowed by the enveloping night. The city, once alive with possibility and excitement, now seemed cold, distant, and unwelcoming. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence that had settled between them. Michael shook his head, his thoughts scattered. "I don't know. He stopped walking abruptly, a wave of frustration hitting him all at once. "This isn't fair, Clara. We saved for months, years for this. It was supposed to be our moment. We were supposed to be able to relax, to celebrate us. And instead, we've been humiliated." Clara reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm, grounding him. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I know it hurts, but we'll figure something out. We always do." They stopped in front of a small cafe, its soft, golden lights beckoning like a warm embrace. Michael wanted to keep walking, to keep fighting, but Clara's quiet strength pulled him in. They entered, finding a corner table with the window slightly ajar, the faint breeze reminding them that the world was still turning, even though their night felt like it had come to a screeching halt. As they sat in silence, the memories of their long journey together began to flood Michael's mind. He remembered the first time he had met Clara, the way her laugh had felt like sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. They had both come from humble beginnings, growing up in neighborhoods where dreams often felt distant, like stars hidden behind clouds. Michael had always worked harder than most to escape the life he was born into. His parents, well-meaning but overwhelmed, had done their best to instill a sense of ambition in him. But it was only when Clara came into his life that he truly found the drive to push beyond what he thought was possible. Together, they had faced countless challenges. From Clara taking on extra tutoring jobs to Michael working late into the night, every sacrifice had been part of their plan. And now, here they were, standing at the precipice of their dreams, only to have them dashed by the cold, dismissive actions of a man who hadn't even given them a second glance. "Do you think he looked at us, like we didn't belong there?" Michael asked, his voice soft but filled with bitterness. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady her own emotions. "I don't know. It felt that way, didn't it? Like we were out of place." Michael ran his hand through his hair, looking at her with a mixture of frustration and helplessness. "We don't have money to throw away, Clara. We worked so hard for this, and then he just looked at us like we were nothing." Clara reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm, offering silent support. "Maybe we can find somewhere else, somewhere that sees us for who we really are. We'll make this work." But Michael's mind was already racing ahead. He couldn't let go of the feeling of injustice. He couldn't just walk away without doing something about it. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, Henry Wallace was still seated behind his polished desk, his expression impassive as he watched the couple leave. He was a man of rules, a man who had risen through the ranks of the hotel industry by maintaining order and exclusivity. But there was something else behind his demeanor, something darker that Michael had yet to see. It wasn't just about policies or procedures, it was about status.
Henry Wallace had spent his entire career cultivating an image of authority, of being the gatekeeper to a world few ever had access to. The Grand Bellevue was his domain, his kingdom, and he took great pride in making sure only the right people could enter. Michael and Clara, with their unpolished appearance, their working-class accents, and their modest demeanor, were the exact opposite of the guests he catered to. In the moments after the couple had left, Henry sat back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. He had made the right decision. It wasn't about money. It was about keeping the hotel's prestige intact. And he knew that people like the Whitmans would never understand. They didn't have the power, the influence, or the connections to stay in a place like the Grand Bellevue. But deep down, Henry felt something he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge: doubt. The decision to turn them away hadn't been easy. He had seen their reservation. He knew they were paying guests, and there had been no technical reason to cancel. But something in their presence had unsettled him. It wasn't just their appearance. It was their quiet ambition, their determined gaze, as if they were trying to break into a world that didn't belong to them. As the night wore on, Henry found himself questioning his actions. Was it really about the hotel's reputation, or had he simply acted out of a sense of superiority? Deep down, he knew he would never admit it to anyone, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, Michael and Clara found themselves caught in the web of their own frustration and growing determination. They didn't have the money to splurge on another luxurious hotel. They didn't have the connections that would allow them to slip past the velvet ropes of exclusivity. But they had something more powerful: each other. "I know it's not fair," Clara said softly as they sat in the cafe, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But we don't need them, Michael. We have each other. We'll make this work, even if we have to start over." Michael clenched his jaw, his frustration giving way to something else, something fierce and resolute. He couldn't let this go. He wouldn't let this be the moment that defined them. Clara watched him with a quiet understanding. What are you thinking? Michael stood up, his eyes hard with determination. We're going back. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Back? What do you mean? I'm going to make them see us, Michael said, his voice thick with resolve. We didn't come this far to be turned away like that. I don't care what it takes. We'll find a way to make it right. Without waiting for her response, Michael pulled out his phone and began dialing. His mind was already spinning with ideas, strategies, plans, and contingencies. But as they stepped out into the night air, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. The Grand Bellevue would not get the last word. The months following their harsh dismissal from the Grand Bellevue had been a whirlwind. Michael and Clara had poured every ounce of energy into a business venture that had once seemed like a distant dream. Through grit, determination, and a bit of good fortune, they had made incredible strides. Clara's meticulous planning and Michael's instinctive drive had pushed them forward, turning a modest investment into a lucrative deal that no one, not even themselves, had anticipated. One fateful day, while looking over a series of contracts in their newly rented office space, a phone call had changed everything. A representative from a prestigious real estate firm had reached out, informing them that the Grand Bellevue was up for sale, and they were offering it to a select few buyers. Clara, who had been handling the financial side of things, had quickly scrolled through the numbers, her eyes widening with realization. The opportunity was too good to pass up. It was the chance of a lifetime, one that they never could have dreamed of when they had first arrived at the hotel, naive and eager. That night, over dinner, the couple discussed the offer, the stakes, and the risk. Michael, as always, was the more reluctant of the two, unsure whether they were ready to take such a monumental step. But Clara, ever the optimist, believed that this was the moment they had been working toward, the moment when everything would come together. "We can do this, Michael," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "We've already built something amazing. This hotel is just the next step. We'll turn it around, make it ours." Michael had nodded, though his heart still raced at the thought of such a bold leap. But after all the struggles they had faced, this was no longer a question of whether they could do it. It was a question of how. 2 months later, they stood at the entrance of the Grand Bellevue once more. But this time, everything had changed. They were no longer the anxious, out-of-place couple who had walked in months ago, hoping for a room. This time, they were the owners, or at least part owners, having secured a significant stake in the hotel's management. The opulent lobby, which had once felt so cold and unwelcoming, now seemed strangely familiar, even intimate. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the crystal chandeliers sparkled with new life. The staff, who had once ignored them or looked down upon them, now greeted them with polite smiles, their expressions not knowing what to make of this sudden shift in the hotel's ownership. As Michael and Clara walked through the lobby, a sense of anticipation mixed with satisfaction began to stir within them. It wasn't just the change of fortune. It was the validation of their dreams. They had built something from nothing. They were no longer outsiders. They were now in control. But as they reached the elevator, the doors slid open, revealing none other than Henry Wallace, the hotel manager. His presence was unmistakable, his perfectly tailored suit, his cold, calculating gaze. He looked up from his paperwork as they approached, a momentary flicker of recognition crossing his face. But there was no smile, no warmth, just a glance of quiet surprise, followed by a strained attempt at professionalism. "Good evening," he said, his voice measured, though there was a noticeable edge of tension behind his words. "I wasn't expecting you. Is there something I can assist you with?" Michael and Clara exchanged a brief look. The moment of truth had arrived. "I think you're mistaken," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. "We're not here for assistance. We own the place now." Henry's face drained of color, and his lips parted slightly, as if he had just been struck. He blinked several times, clearly trying to process what had just been said. "You own the hotel?" he stammered, his eyes flicking from Michael to Clara and back again. "That's not possible. This is the Grand Bellevue. It's not for people like you." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady, but her eyes sharp. "That's exactly what you told us when we tried to stay here, wasn't it, Mr. Wallace?" that we didn't belong. But you see, now we do belong. In fact, we've been running things behind the scenes for weeks. We just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized that the very people you turned away are the ones holding the power now." There was a long, pregnant pause in the air as Henry stood frozen, his mind desperately racing to reconcile the reality of the situation. The arrogance that had once dominated his demeanor seemed to falter. The walls he had so carefully built around his sense of superiority now felt like a house of cards, teetering on the verge of collapse. Michael couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. The same man who had looked at them with disdain, who had refused to allow them into his world, was now standing before them, completely powerless. The power dynamic had shifted, and with it, everything Henry had held dear seemed to unravel. "You should have treated us better, Mr. Wallace," Clara said, her voice calm but laden with a quiet strength. "You assumed that we were just some people who didn't belong in your world. But the truth is, we've built a world of our own, and now, it's your turn to live in it." Henry opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was a mask of disbelief, frustration, and humiliation all at once. For the first time in his career, he felt small, insignificant. The confidence that had once come so naturally to him was gone, replaced by the realization that the very thing he had worked so hard to protect, his status, was now slipping through his fingers. "Is there anything else, Mr. Wallace?" Michael asked, his tone now businesslike, almost indifferent to the man's obvious discomfort. Henry swallowed hard, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the moment. "No," he finally muttered, his voice devoid of the previous arrogance. "I'll have the staff take care of everything." With that, he turned and hurried toward the back office, his steps quick and unsteady, as if he couldn't wait to escape the situation entirely. Michael and Clara exchanged a look, one filled with triumph, but also a quiet sense of bittersweet justice. They had fought hard for this moment, and now they had claimed it. The journey had been long, the challenges many, but here they stood, at the peak of their ambitions. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Clara placed a hand on Michael's arm, her voice soft but full of emotion. "We did it. We really did it." Michael smiled, a sense of peace finally settling over him. "Yes, we did. And we're just getting started." In the days following their return to the Grand Bellevue, Michael and Clara found themselves adjusting to their new roles with a mix of excitement and trepidation. What had once seemed like an unimaginable dream was now their reality. They were no longer strangers to the hotel's grandeur, but a part of it, intertwined with its history and future. The lobby that had once felt so distant and cold now felt like home, a space they had earned and cultivated. The hotel staff, many of whom had witnessed the couple's original arrival, greeted them with newfound respect. At first, the change was subtle, a slight shift in their tone, the way they addressed Clara and Michael with a kind of reverence. Where once they had been met with indifference, now there was acknowledgement, sometimes even warmth. It wasn't that they were showered with excessive compliments or flattering words. No, it was the quiet respect that spoke volumes. The staff had seen the couple's journey, and they knew what it took to rise to the top. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it didn't come without its challenges. Michael found himself spending long hours in the office, overseeing the operations, reviewing contracts, and meeting with potential investors. Clara, ever the perfectionist, was deeply involved in the hotel's renovation plans, bringing in new designs and refreshing the hotel's old-world charm without losing its prestige. They were both determined to prove that they were not only capable of managing this establishment, but destined to make it thrive. Yet, despite the triumph, there were moments when the weight of their success felt heavy. There were evenings when Clara would sit by the window in her office, staring out at the city skyline, reflecting on how far they had come. She thought about their journey, how they had once been denied a room in this very hotel, humiliated and rejected by the very people who now bowed to them. The sting of that memory hadn't disappeared, but it had been replaced with a sense of empowerment. They had overcome adversity, and in doing so, had reclaimed their place in a world that had once felt closed off to them. Michael, on the other hand, sometimes found himself reflecting on the earlier days, when he had been uncertain of their path. He remembered Clara's unwavering belief in their success, the way she had pushed him forward when he felt too afraid to take the leap. Now, as he walked the halls of the Grand Bellevue, a sense of pride filled his chest. They had made it. But he also knew that there were challenges ahead, challenges that had nothing to do with the money they had earned or the property they now owned. It was the weight of leadership, of holding the keys to a legacy. It was the responsibility of not just running a hotel, but of living up to the vision they had for it. One morning, as Clara stood in the lobby overseeing some of the renovations, a familiar figure walked through the door. Henry Wallace, the former hotel manager, was standing at the front desk, speaking with the new manager. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him since that fateful day when the power dynamics had shifted, and she wasn't sure how she would react. Would he still be resentful, bitter, or would he have come to terms with his actions? Henry seemed to have aged in the few months since their last encounter. His normally immaculate suit was a bit wrinkled, his posture not as confident as it had once been. There was a noticeable tension in his movements as he spoke to the staff, and his eyes kept darting around the room, avoiding direct eye contact with Clara. Clara took a deep breath before approaching him. She hadn't planned to confront him, but now, as he stood before her, she realized it was time. This was the moment for closure. "Mr. Wallace," Clara began, her voice even but firm. "It's good to see you. How are you?" Henry looked up at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and unease. He shifted uncomfortably before nodding. "I'm doing well, Miss Clark. Thank you for asking." There was a long pause between them, and Clara could sense the unspoken tension in the air. It wasn't that Henry had been a bad person, just misguided. His arrogance had stemmed from a place of insecurity, of wanting to maintain control in a world he felt entitled to dominate. But now, Clara saw him differently. She saw someone who had lost something, his status, his position, and had likely spent sleepless nights regretting the actions that had led to his downfall. "I just wanted to tell you," Henry continued, his voice quieter now, "that I've been thinking a lot about what happened. The way I treated you and your husband, it wasn't right, and I regret it. I truly do." Clara blinked, taken aback by his admission. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was sincere. She had never expected an apology, especially not from someone as proud as Henry Wallace. But here it was, raw and genuine. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he added, his eyes looking down, "but I wanted you to know that I've learned from my mistakes." Clara stood in silence for a moment, allowing his words to settle. She wasn't sure what she expected, but this felt right. She had no need for revenge, no desire to rub his face in his humiliation. What had happened in the past was just that, the past. They had moved forward, and in a way, so had he. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Wallace," Clara said softly, "and I believe that people can change. I hope this experience teaches you something important." Henry nodded, looking somewhat relieved, though the weight of the past still lingered in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, and without another word, he turned and walked out of the lobby, leaving Clara standing there, reflecting on the strange, quiet exchange. As Henry's figure disappeared through the front doors, Clara felt a sense of closure wash over her. She wasn't sure if forgiveness was the right word, but there was no longer any bitterness in her heart. The journey had taught her the importance of resilience, of fighting not just for success, but for the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Later that evening, as Michael joined her for dinner in the hotel's newly renovated dining room, he noticed the shift in her demeanor. Clara seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "You look like you're at peace," he remarked, his voice gentle. Clara smiled, her eyes thoughtful. "I think I am. We've come so far, Michael. But there's always room for growth, even for the people who try to keep us down. I'm learning to let go of the past and focus on what we've built." Michael took her hand across the table. "And we're just getting started. This hotel, this life, it's all ours now." The couple exchanged a quiet smile, their hearts full. The Grand Bellevue, once a symbol of rejection, had become a testament to their perseverance. It was a place where dreams were realized, and even the most difficult lessons were learned. The past was behind them, but the future was bright, and together, they were ready for whatever came next. The Grand Bellevue had changed, not just in its walls, its floors, or its shiny new renovations, but in the very essence of what it stood for. Under Michael and Clara's leadership, the hotel had become something more than just a symbol of luxury. It was now a testament to resilience, vision, and the strength of the human spirit. The couple, now fully settled into their roles as owners of the prestigious hotel, had made subtle but impactful decisions that rippled throughout every corner of the establishment. They didn't just want to be known for their wealth or business acumen. They wanted to leave a legacy of kindness, inclusivity, and respect. Where once the walls had echoed with whispers of exclusivity and entitlement, they now hummed with the quiet hum of genuine hospitality. One of the first changes Clara and Michael made was revising the hotel's strict policies. They noticed how, in the past, the Bellevue had prided itself on upholding rules with an iron fist, no matter how trivial the infractions. Guests had to follow every rule to the letter, with little to no room for grace. Michael and Clara knew they had to change that. Their vision was clear. The hotel should be a haven for everyone, an experience that made people feel welcome, regardless of their status or wealth. They began by offering a special program for guests who had experienced hardship or needed a place to escape. People like the couple they once were. A gesture that had once been impossible to imagine in a hotel of such high standing, it now became a cornerstone of the Bellevue's renewed mission. It wasn't about making headlines or showing off their wealth. It was about creating an environment where people felt valued. Clara also made changes to the staff culture. She initiated regular staff appreciation events, where every employee, no matter their position, would be treated to lunch or a day off. She made sure there was always an open line of communication between the staff and the management. Everyone is part of the experience, Clara would often say during meetings. If we treat each other with respect, that respect will ripple out to our guests. In addition, the couple introduced a mentorship program for aspiring hotel managers and hospitality workers, offering scholarships to those who wished to develop their careers. They worked with local communities to provide training and work opportunities, fostering an atmosphere of growth, trust, and empathy. It was a complete transformation from the cold, impersonal attitude that had prevailed before. As the Bellevue slowly became a hotel known for its inclusivity, kindness, and excellence, Clara and Michael knew their work was far from over. There was still much to be done, but they were no longer the couple who had once been turned away at the door. They were now at the helm of an empire they had built through blood, sweat, and tears. Their perseverance had paid off, and with it, they had created a space where everyone could thrive. Meanwhile, Henry Wallace, the former manager, had not disappeared entirely from the picture. After the couple had taken over the hotel, he had been reassigned to another branch in a smaller, more remote location within the hotel group. It was a humbling experience for him. He had been at the pinnacle of his career, managing the Grand Bellevue, only to find himself in a much less prestigious position. At first, Henry resented the demotion. It felt like a punishment for his mistakes, and in many ways it was. But over time, he began to reflect. He watched from a distance as the Bellevue blossomed under Clara and Michael's leadership. He saw how the guests, once treated with indifference or coldness, now spoke warmly of their experiences. He saw how the staff worked with a sense of pride and joy that had been sorely lacking before. And most strikingly, he noticed how Clara and Michael's kindness wasn't just reserved for those they could profit from. It extended to everyone. Henry had always believed in the old rules, the ones that told him power was a right to be guarded, and that people should be judged based on their status. But watching the couple's success through their unwavering kindness, Henry began to question those beliefs. He saw how Clara and Michael's leadership style had not only won the loyalty of their staff and guests, but had also transformed the hotel into something much more valuable than just a business. It was a place of growth, respect, and human connection. He began to realize how hollow his previous attitudes had been. A few months later, Henry found himself back in the lobby of the Grand Bellevue. He had been invited, not as a disgraced former manager, but as part of an industry event. Clara and Michael had agreed to host a hospitality summit at their hotel, bringing together professionals from around the world to discuss the future of luxury travel and customer experience. It was an important moment for the Bellevue, but also for Henry. His invitation was a gesture of reconciliation. a sign that he was no longer defined by his past mistakes. When he arrived, he was greeted by Clara, who smiled warmly at him. "Welcome back, Mr. Wallace," she said, her tone friendly but professional. It was a small moment, but to Henry, it meant more than he could express. It was a sign that things had come full circle, that the bitterness and resentment between them had been laid to rest. As the event went on, Henry spent time reflecting on how far he had come. He no longer had the arrogant air he once carried. Instead, there was a quiet humility about him, a recognition of how important it was to treat people with respect, regardless of their status. He had learned the hard way, but he had learned nonetheless. By the end of the summit, Henry approached Clara and Michael. He stood before them, a little hesitant, but determined. "I owe both of you an apology," he said, his voice low but clear. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I treated you, and I regret it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I've learned. You've shown me that leadership isn't just about power. It's about respect, kindness, and humility. Thank you for giving me that lesson." Clara and Michael exchanged a look, then smiled. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Wallace," Clara said. "We all grow, and we're all part of this journey. It's never too late to change." The couple's forgiveness wasn't just for Henry. It was a reflection of everything they had come to understand about themselves, their success, and their values. They had persevered through rejection, struggled with doubt, but had ultimately triumphed through humility and grace. The lessons they had learned along the way, about strength, resilience, and the power of kindness, had become the cornerstone of their leadership. As they stood together in the heart of the Grand Bellevue, Michael and Clara knew that their journey was far from over. There were more challenges to face, more growth to be had. But one thing was clear. No matter what happened next, they had already won. They had built something lasting, a hotel, a legacy, and a life that reflected the very best of who they were. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all.